This video discusses sensitive topics related to depression and mental health, and may include discussions about suicidal thoughts. If you are experiencing any of these thoughts or need help, please reach out to mental health professionals or contact emergency hotlines available in your country. You are not alone. Support and assistance are always available. More than 300 million people around the world suffer from depression, and by 2030, depression and mental illnesses are expected to surpass heart disease to become the biggest source of health concern globally. Here, we're not talking about the fleeting feeling of sadness that anyone may experience from time to time, but about the illness of depression. Depression is a complex mental and psychological health disorder, and it is often misunderstood. It goes beyond the limits of feeling blue to become a complex interplay between genetics, environment, and personal circumstances, capable of engulfing anyone regardless of age, gender, or background. Today, we will embark on a journey to explore the stories of those afflicted with depression, trying to understand this illness and how to deal with it if we or someone around us is affected. We begin our story with Andrew Solomon, a writer and lecturer on psychology, politics, and the arts, and author of the book, The Noonday Demon. He states in his book that depression is rude. Evil spirits, demons, and ghosts hide under the cover of night because invisibility lies their defeat. But depression comes to you in broad daylight. It comes to you at the height of your knowledge, awareness, and understanding. Andrew's story with depression begins at a time when his life is very stable. He recounts that he published his first novel, which was received very well, and he was happy with his family. Amidst this period that he describes as good, he gradually began to feel a deep boredom, a severe state known as anhedonia. Over time, he began to feel chronic fatigue and saw the positive reception of his novel, but it didn't matter much to him. His sexual desire started to decrease as well. With time, he started to feel that something was wrong. He began to fear and tried to force himself to feel joy, tried to force himself to enjoy life. He started making a schedule for fun, a schedule for pleasures, but to his surprise, nothing made him happy anymore. Even the concern of people around him became a burden instead of a joy. The messages from his friends became a source of exhaustion, and he didn't want to respond to them at all. There were times when he would be driving and suddenly feel that he couldn't drive anymore, so he would park the car and start crying. Then he began to have sleep problems. He couldn't sleep, but he also couldn't get out of bed, a condition known as psychomotor retardation, which causes the thoughts and movements of a depressed patient to slow down. These symptoms and others make depression one of the most disabling diseases in the world. You might imagine disability as a physical problem, such as injuries in wars, serious illnesses, or cancer. But the World Health Organization says that by 2025, depression will be the second largest cause of disability worldwide. In the United States, for example, among young people, depression is the biggest cause of disability. Statistics show that depression takes more years from people's lives than war, cancer, and AIDS combined. Solomon would recount how he would lie in bed for hours, wanting to reach for the phone but unable to. He recounted lying in bed crying because he was afraid to take a shower. He knew very well that outside there were people who went bankrupt, lost their homes, were fighting wars, mothers who lost their children, and there were famines and natural disasters, while he was lying in bed afraid to shower. A depression patient has a deep sense of fear of nothing and everything. Freud described pleasure as the release from tension. Andrew recounts that the psychological tension he had would persist, never reaching a state of relaxation or release. He was always afraid without anything actually happening to justify that fear. The situation became unbearable, and Solomon had to see a psychiatrist. He went to the doctor and started taking medication. Unfortunately, antidepressants take time to show results. But after about 2 months, his condition began to improve. He felt that the worst part of that phase was over, and knew that whatever the cost, he did not want to experience that again. The treatment worked excellently. But Solomon recounted that during that period, the side effects of the medication made him feel like he lost his sense of self and personality. This leads to a common question. Does the medication treat the mental illness or fundamentally change who I am? For example, if you are naturally a person who is very concerned about his work, and the medication makes you relaxed and unconcerned, then you have changed. Many people don't like this idea and begin to ask a very realistic question. Which one is truly me and which one is the depression? Solomon then began to stop the treatment himself and started entering a new cycle of terror and fear. He started exhibiting what is called agitated depression, which can be described as an intense feeling of hatred, regret, and self-loathing. He cut off relationships with many people, fought with many others, hurt others, and had endless problems with his family over very trivial things. This nervousness and these problems made him unable to sleep. When he couldn't sleep at night, he became even more irritable when he woke up. And when he was in a state of irritability, he couldn't concentrate on his work and his relationships. Here lies a significant crisis. A depressed person can become harmful and violent to those around them, consequently losing more of the people around them. And everything in front of them collapses, leading them to think about ending their lives. During that period, Solomon didn't want to kill himself to avoid causing distress to his family, but he wanted to die to avoid upsetting himself any further. He didn't want guns or to jump from buildings. He wanted his death not to be a spectacle. He wanted a death that people would see and say it was fate, like a disease, a deadly disease. He didn't know how to give himself cancer, but he knew how to give himself AIDS. In his bleak life, Solomon recounted how he faced death in his daily life. He drank a lot, crossed busy roads recklessly, walked the streets of New York in the dead of night, and played dangerous games, all in the hope that death would find him. Every week he tried to meet dangerous men he didn't know, and engaged in unsafe relationships with many women contracting a virus that would destroy his immune system. And in about 4 months, he had unsafe relationships with about 18 women. On his 32nd birthday, he celebrated and rejoiced, thinking it would be his last birthday. But the examination results were negative. Despite his attempts to kill himself, he was very happy when he found the results were negative. He returned to treatment and got better, and now he is in his 60s. The renowned neuroscientist and biologist Robert Sapolsky from Stanford University says that depression is the worst disease ever. Robert says that if you sometimes ask someone with cancer, heart disease, or any malignant disease, they might say they are, of course, annoyed and troubled by the pain, very tired and exhausted. However, they might be happy and joyful being surrounded by their friends, pleased with their family's prayers, or happy with their spiritual relationships. Sapolsky explains that a major challenge with a condition like depression is its hallmark symptom, the incapacity to experience joy or derive pleasure from anything. Be it a movie, a song, a book, success, family, or relationships, happiness remains elusive. The terrifying thing is that a depressed patient doesn't know anything and can't do anything, to the extent that all this misery may not make them feel sad. Sadness itself is affected by this experience. Solomon recounts that during his treatment journey, when 2 of his friends died, he was happy that he could mourn them. Believe me, even sadness is a great blessing. If you can't feel sadness, you can't appreciate happiness, and you can't love or fear for those you love. It can be said that the ghost of fear and despair drives love. Sadness is considered a natural part of the human experience, a healthy reaction to painful events or loss. By experiencing sadness, people can appreciate happy times and important people in their lives more deeply. Depression is a disease, and there is a big difference between being upset or sad and being depressed. Depression also has different levels. There is mild depression, and there is depression that can be fatal. Depression can be environmental. Toxic relationships around you can bring about this depression. It can also be genetic, as studies indicate that depression can be inherited. Depression, like any physical illness, is not necessarily cured by worship recreation, or social gatherings. These can certainly help, but they cannot cure the illness. Depression is an organic disease because it involves changes in neurochemistry. In addition, there are medical criteria that medicine and science rely on to diagnose whether a person is depressed. If you have sleep problems, sleeping too much or too little, if you always feel in a bad mood, if you feel like harming yourself or feel worthless, if you don't enjoy things that usually make you happy, or if you have any other symptoms that persist for 2 weeks or more, you are likely to be diagnosed with depression. A study in the Lancet journal found that there were more than 136 million people with depression in 2017, and the percentage of people who may suffer from depression in their lifetime can range from 10 to 15%. In countries like France, the percentage of people with depression is about 21%. Statistics also indicate that women are more likely to suffer from depression. For women, there are pains of pregnancy, breastfeeding, and menstrual pains. There is also a high likelihood of rape, up to 20%, with about a 33% chance of domestic violence. Women also face lower salaries, fewer job opportunities, and even less education, leading to lower serotonin production and consequently a higher chance of depression. The depression experienced by a mother can affect her child, as many instances of childhood depression stem from maternal depression. A mother grappling with depression may struggle to provide nurturing care, establish clear rules for upbringing, experience unexplained bursts of anger, and feel overwhelming guilt, which can also manifest as excessive displays of affection and love. These dynamics in the mother can have unexpected and complex impacts on the child, to the point that addressing the mother's depression can lead to improvements in the child's well-being. Going back in history, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, specifically in April 1940, came to power after great struggles, and decided during that period to confront the German army led by Hitler, who had occupied many parts of Europe: Poland, Norway, Denmark, the Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, France, Greece, Czechoslovakia, and others. Churchill stood bravely against Hitler, and after long years of war and more than 60 million dead, Churchill and the Allied powers managed to triumph. The British people made Churchill a legendary hero, and without a doubt, many consider him the most important prime minister in British history and one of the most significant figures of the 20th century. Churchill was not afraid of Hitler and his armies, nor of the German Air Force bombing London, nor of the wars he participated in during his youth. But despite all this external might and strength, he confided to his psychiatrist that he was afraid to stand on the edge of the platform when a train was approaching. He said, "I don't like standing near the edge of a platform when an express train is passing through. I like to stand right back, and if possible, get a pillar between me and the train. I don't like to stand by the side of a ship and look down into the water. A second's action would end everything." This quote took place in 1945, after the end of World War II, which crowned him as its greatest hero. It was supposed to be a time of victory, fame, and wealth, a time of great success and happiness. However, Churchill complained to his doctor about the balcony of his room, saying he did not like sleeping near such an edge, and that he had no desire to leave the world, but desperate thoughts came into his head. Imagine that despite being known for his bravery, the thing he feared most for himself was his own thoughts. Instead of focusing on the most significant victory in the most important war in history, his thoughts were on his defeat in the last elections in July 1945. Of course, there are historical disputes about whether we can say Churchill had depression or not. However, some doctors have discussed the relationship between depression and addiction, noting that it makes people more susceptible to addiction. There was a significant addiction relationship between Churchill, cigarettes, and alcohol. He famously said, "I could not live without champagne. In victory, I deserve it. In defeat, I need it." Many sources state that Winston Churchill described his bouts of depression using the term "black dog." Churchill's case shows how one can be successful and great and achieve significant accomplishments, yet still stand at the door of depression, or as Churchill described it, the black dog. Some studies indicate that the smartest and most successful people are more prone to depression and anxiety disorders compared to the average person. The organization Mensa, known as an international non-profit organization for individuals with high intelligence levels, typically measured through recognized intelligence tests like the standard IQ test, found that 26% of its members have mood disorders and 20% have anxiety disorders. In contrast, the chance of an ordinary person experiencing these issues is 10%. There is no theory explaining why this rate is high, but it can be imagined that an anxious or depressed mind is always thinking, always noticing, and always anticipating that something will happen or might happen. Churchill was a brave person and expressed his bouts of depression on several occasions. However, the problem with men's depression is that it's not easy to talk about or express. Statistics show that depression rates in women are twice as high as in men, but many scientists expect these rates to be inaccurate because many men do not talk about it. Men often do not talk about their pain. Men are secretive and often suffer alone because the world views it as shameful for a man to complain, to be afraid, to cry, or to feel weak. A man can be subjected to injustice, violence, and rejection, but he is always expected to stand firm, resist, and fight without complaining because he is a man. And this makes depression for many men difficult and very painful. Imagine a man afraid to bathe or cry in the street, or a man who couldn't find a job and sits at home as a heavy burden on his family. On top of all that, he is unable to complain and express what's inside him. The feeling of depression in women rises because they feel they are not happy enough, whereas in men, their feeling of depression increases because they feel they are not brave enough. With this immense suppression of emotions, men turn into ticking time bombs, exploding in the form of violence. This violence may be directed at their families, and they live in an endless cycle of violence and depression. Men's depression doesn't just affect others. As I mentioned earlier, the number of depressed women is double the number of depressed men. But imagine that the number of men who commit suicide is 4 times the number of women who commit suicide. Imagine that the number of depressed women is higher, and men are supposed to be half that number, but 4 times more men than women commit suicide. In reality, it must be emphasized and made aware that suicidal thoughts are contagious. Studies find that talking about suicide leads to more incidents. Sociologist David Phillips named the theory the Werther effect, inspired by the novel The Sorrows of Young Werther. It is said that after the publication of this novel, many people killed themselves, leaving the page where the hero kills himself open. Imagine that the famous actress Marilyn Monroe committed suicide on August 5, 1962, and that month suicide rates increased by 10% compared to August in previous years. Dr. Phillips says that even a single story spread in the press can increase its occurrence. The terrifying truth lies in an Australian study where they met people who attempted suicide but did not succeed, and asked them about the time between their thoughts and the suicide attempt. From the first thought to the execution. They found that more than 70% of these people took less than an hour between deciding to commit suicide and attempting it, which is an incredibly short time to make literally the most important and final decision in life. It's important to understand that 90% of people who attempted suicide and did not succeed will not die from suicide thereafter, as statistics indicate that the vast majority of them, after a failed attempt, will cling to life. If we help people in these moments of intense thoughts and provide the necessary assistance or get them a specialist, they will respond positively. Therefore, we always emphasize the importance of extending a helping hand to those around us and not trivializing these thoughts, and strive to guide them to a specialist so they can return to their natural state and rid themselves of negative thoughts. The hardest thing that can happen is when our brain abandons us, which is the closest thing to us. We can understand when nature betrays us and causes natural disasters like volcanoes and earthquakes, when humans betray us by lying, cheating, stealing, and killing, and even when the body betrays us with autoimmune diseases and cancers. But the betrayal of the mind can be the most painful. When you experience a mental illness like depression, You may become confused and unsure about which of the voices inside your head is truly you. Who are you and who is depression? Who are you and who is anxiety? Who are you and who is the illness? In reality, depression is not a poetic drama as we have portrayed it. Depression is an organic disease and a chemical imbalance in the brain, and there are very effective treatments. There is the therapist who specializes in helping you understand and deal with your negative thoughts. There are medications that are very effective for more than 60% of cases, even for those in critical situations who see no hope in their lives. They take the medication, and within 2 weeks to a month, they begin to feel a desire to live and enjoy life again, and they lead a normal life. The medication is highly effective, and you should discuss these medications with a specialist who will guide you to the best way to get the best results. Although the treatment takes time, its results are amazing. There is also something like ECT, which involves brain stimulation. Although this treatment had a bad reputation in the past, it has become very easy and not as frightening as it was in the old days. There are things that can help you, like exercise, diet, and healthy social and family relationships. For each case, depending on its severity, there are appropriate solutions for it. What I want to convey is that there are many solutions. Believe me, everything can be treated. If you ever know someone suffering, try to get them to a specialist and offer them a helping hand and support. One of the most important things Solomon talked about in his experience is that the opposite of depression is not happiness, but vitality. Thank you for staying with us until this moment. Do not forget to support us by liking and subscribing and waiting for our upcoming works.